Hi, I'm Mike Conlon, your host of the Weiser Books Radio Hour. Today's guest is Lilith Dorsey, voodoo priestess, magical practitioner, and author of multiple books, including Love Magic, Water Magic, and the new one that we just published, Orishas, Goddesses, and Voodoo Queens. Welcome to the show, Lilith. It's great to have you on again.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to talk about this book. I love
Yeah,
it.
it's really great to have you on. So, I got to say that there is a huge difference between the presentation of the first book you did with Weiser, Love Magic, and the presentation of this one. I'm going to guess that you're going to say that this one is a lot closer in spirit to what you were hoping for.
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely. I'm really fond of the font and the layout and the design. It looks really familiar, so I like it. I like it. I mean, this was just the book I always wanted to write, so that the cover is so strong and so powerful
Right.
that really made me happy. Yeah.
Yeah, it was it's a really striking cover, and it's one that a lot of times we go back and forth on covers internally, but once everybody saw this cover, it was like, oh yeah, that's it. We really hope Lilith likes it because this is the cover. You said that it's something that you've wanted to do for a long time. How did you get the idea for the book? Where did it start, and how did it develop through to this finished product?
I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really was the book I always wanted to write. Like you said, I had other titles that were more, germane or popular to what the market was at the time, but this was the one that was close to my heart. I wrote it for my daughters. I wrote it for myself. When I was going to school and growing up, there wasn't really any strong images of the, divine feminine, especially coming from Africa. So I wanted to represent that and have something that I could be proud of and my daughters could be proud of. And that was really the whole time I was in school and everything. It was just like, this is bad. This is terrible. This whole, misogynistic, Eurocentric ideal of everything that I think a lot of us have been fighting against. And now it was time for this book to really come out. And I'm just so happy. I mean, so many people write me and tell me it's changed their lives and it's really stopped them from having that kind of negative outlook that was foisted on them from the outside for so long. And it makes me proud that I could do that and really happy that people are receiving the message.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you get that on social media, letters, how do people contact you that you're getting this feedback?
Social media, email, I got one on Instagram the other day. She said she had taken my first book out of the library when she was a teenager and had it under the covers with a flashlight so her deacon father wouldn't see her and find out because voodoo is evil. And, she's so happy to see all the other books that I've published. And I was just like, wow, like that to me means so much. I mean, return your library books, everybody. But the fact that somebody was a young girl coming up and seeing herself in the words was something that was just so powerful. And like I said, I get mothers that tell me they've ordered it for their daughter or something, and that just makes me feel so good.
So when you come up against, you mentioned that person whose father was a preacher, reading it under the covers. Obviously there's some negative associations with voodoo specifically. When you come up against that, how do you deal with it? Do you confront it? Do you kind of gloss over it? How do you react when someone responds negatively to what you're presenting?
I
Or do
think
you
I
run
try
into it?
and, meet your foe where they are,
Right.
I mean, if it's somebody who's just so rooted in that dogmatic, traditional, religious, non-African belief, Christianity or Judaism or Islam, where there really are things against any kind of witchcraft or alternative spirituality, I try and just explain that if we go back even before that existed, we talk about the Orisha Shango, who's actually dated back to the 4th century BCE. So we're talking about an Orisha that existed before Christ. So this was the original way of spirituality when we're talking about these things. So I just point out to them that I'm really just going back to what we had before all of this, and all of this, right, wrong, or whatever, is still your personal choice. But if we go back, this was something that was put upon us and not the original thing that we had. And I make that point, and I hope that people come to have an open mind about it. I know a lot of people still practice Christianity and voodoo or other African traditional religions, and they seem to make it work. That's the way it was done for hundreds of years. And if they can make it work, that's great. If they can't make it work, then, if you're getting everything from your own system, then, read my book to find out what it's about and then move along, so you don't still have the prejudices that you might have. Because I think a lot of people's ideas about voodoo and Santeria, Lukumi are from media, from this sort of popular misconception, the demonization of these traditions, and that's not the reality of it at all.
Got it. So, I think from a sales point, on our end, we took a book like yours and we called it Orishas, Goddesses, and Voodoo Queens, just to make perfectly clear what the book is about, what's in the book for anyone who's shopping it, whether it's a buyer at a bookstore or a consumer seeing it on a shelf. Was that your original title?
No, it was not.
Okay, fine. Did you mind what we ended up with?
Actually, I wanted to make it a longer book.
Yeah,
Goddesses is in the title, and
right.
there's a lot of, especially with traditional older people in the ATRs, they don't really consider the Orisha or the Loa gods and goddesses. They consider them Orisha and Loa, which is something different. Again, an outside system and verbology being attached to something that's even older than it. So what I wanted was something that encompassed even more goddesses, but then it got too long, so we had to pare it down. That was my original conception.
So,
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about the difference between Orishas, goddesses, and since we got Voodoo Queens in the title, how do they figure into the book as well?
Well, the thing about all the African traditional religions is that eventually, if you live a good enough life, you can get elevated to the level of Orisha or Loa. And that's what some of these voodoo queens really did. We talk about somebody like Marie Laveau in the book, who is still honored today, hundreds of years after she was active here in the city of New Orleans. We didn't have floats and stuff for Mardi Gras this year. Now that I live in New Orleans, I was sad my first Mardi Gras as a resident, and we didn't
Oh,
have
what a drag.
floats, but they had house floats. So everybody decorated their house, and it was wonderful. I got to see two different floats. One was Marie Laveau's tomb. So that was fantastic. These people had a giant, like 10-foot tall plywood Marie Laveau tomb on their yard. And then one really was Marie Laveau with the serpent wrapped around her neck and everything like that. And I thought that must take such, energy and dedication to decorate your house and dedicate it to Marie Laveau. So her spirit is still alive and well in the city, despite the pandemic, despite everything else that's been going on. And she really is elevated to the level of, first honored ancestor and then really a Orisha or Loa spirit that people leave offerings to and make petitions to and incorporate in their life on a very deep spiritual level. So that's how they got in there.
Right.
The distinction, I think, is more one of linguistics. I'm an anthropologist. I did my undergrad and part of my grad work in anthro. So when we look at the words for it, Orisha literally breaks down to Ori, which is head, and Sha, which is the root word of Ashe, which is our spiritual energy. So it's talking about the spiritual energy that comes from your head, that rules your head, that guides you, the spiritual energy that permeates everything in the universe. And you can align yourself with that in order to be the best person you can be, the most successful, the happiest, all of these things.
You just mentioned that you're in New Orleans now. I think last time I interviewed you, you were in New York. I think Brooklyn. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm one
Yeah.
of the 5 people who moved during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
woo woo, yay me.
uh,
Yeah.
so
One in
I'm.
5 people. That's a lot of people moving. You
It
know
is
what
a
I
lot of.
mean? Like,
It's a lot of people moving around, but I'm wondering specifically in your case, what brought that on? Why the move? The timing notwithstanding,
right.
going from New York to New Orleans is it's a pretty big move. From one kind of the top of the country to the bottom, from the north to the south, from everything that's going on in New York to everything that goes on in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a connection anyway. I have know a person here who wrote a book from Brooklyn to Bywater, which my neighborhood is right next to the Bywater neighborhood in New Orleans. So I thought I'm not the only one who's
Right.
made the trip. So there's a lot of similarities and things like that. But I'm a native New Yorker, and it was hard to leave. It was getting too expensive. And then with the pandemic and the lockdown, I mean, I never would have been able to afford my own house in Brooklyn.
Right.
And I have my own house here. We're about to open a Voodoo B&B so people can come and stay with me and get all the voodoo firsthand and stuff like that. I've got a huge garden, which I miss gardening. My minor was in plant science. I love plants, magical plants, growing everything, getting my hands in the earth. And so it really just sort of worked out this way that I had a place to go. I was traveling here 5 times a year before I actually moved. So that's a lot,
Yeah.
both for events and to see friends. And I used to dance for the Grammy winner jazz musician, Dr. John.
Right.
So I used to come down and do shows all the time. So it's like, it just sort of made sense. Although
Uh,
my mortgage broker said to me, we're going to have to explain why you're moving from New York to New Orleans. And then he said, well, you're kind of old. So people go south when they get old. And I was like, okay, thanks a lot. Whatever.
oh my God. Did you just call me old?
Yeah,
Oh
thanks.
my God.
Okay, am I paying for this? Okay.
Oh boy,
Yeah.
having said that, I just got back from Florida, and it's hard to keep things from growing down there. I mean, it's just such a great environment to grow things for sure. But man, old. Ugh.
I know. I know. I mean, I do hate the snow. I've always hated the snow. I
Yeah.
used to live up in New England, outside of Providence, and
Oh
that
boy.
was a nightmare. You know. So, but New York isn't good either with the ice and the rest of it. And, but my heart's still there. I plan to go back as often as I can, when
Oh,
things open up again.
absolutely. Then you'll be making 5 trips a year up to New York
Oh,
instead.
definitely.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got a lot of people to see. My
I
got
get it.
family still there,
I
and
get it.
little friends and all of these things. Yes.
So let's see. You mentioned a voodoo themed Airbnb.
Yes, that's my latest actual project that's not writing or some other kind of actual content creating. So we're working on that. I have a double shotgun. So the other half is going to be the voodoo themed Airbnb, and we're going to offer voodoo themed meals. I have some of Marie Laveau's recipes. People can come and get a reading from me. There's going to be a lending library, all of these things. And, finally, I have a space to put all my extra voodoo stuff. That was really the underlying thing about it, because I have so much stuff now.
Right.
I got contacted by the Buckland Museum of Witchcraft not that long ago. So I sent a bunch of stuff up there. That was really fortunate because I was moving. So then it was like, oh yeah, let me put this in a box and it'll go to the museum. But now I get to have my own kind of like living B&B museum next door.
That's going to be cool. I wish you the best in that. And I'm kind of jealous. Maybe I'll visit sometime because
Yes, please do.
that sounds like a
Please
real good
do.
time. Uh,
Yeah.
so let's see, you mentioned that you had traveled down to New Orleans quite a bit. Were you already part of the magical community down there? And how has your book been received within that community?
Oh, it's great. I mean, I've been a part of this community, I think, for 26 years now. I belong to the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, 1428 North Rampart Street with Priestess Miriam. And she's very close to my heart. And I've been with her for a long time. So it's nice to be able to come down and spend time with spiritual family, you know what I mean, and be closer. And a lot of the other stores in the area, Crescent City Conjure, and some of the other stores have taken the book and said it's doing really well. So I'm very happy about that. Yes, yes.
So, because you're part of the magical community, in your own personal practice, do you notice a difference energetically between being in New York and New Orleans?
It's funny, I made a documentary years ago. It was even before Katrina, 2004, I believe it was, but it was called Bodies of Water, Voodoo Transformation and Identity. And it was all about how the body of water that you're near really shapes the character of your spirituality. So I talked about how the East River and the waters in New York shaped my influence and practice of voodoo while I was there. And I talked about how the Mississippi down here shaped the influence and character of the religion down here. And now I see it, that was what, 2004? That was a long time ago. good at math, but I see it even more now that I'm here. It's funny, before I was leaving, a dear friend of mine who's a Babalawo Ifa priest, we were driving over the Verrazano Bridge, which I grew up living right near the Verrazano Bridge. And he said something about it being the connection between the two waters, the Oshun River, the East River that's right there, and then how it goes out to the ocean at Coney Island, and how that's the Ashe, or the energy of Yemaya. So I was like, wow, I grew up my whole life and never realized. I knew what the spirit, the soul, the Ashe of the place was, but it never just logically clicked in my mind that, wow, this is where these two waters meet. This is where these two sacred energies blend and combine and become something stronger. And when I got down here, I knew where it was on a map. I'm probably the only person who's listening to this who would even consider buying a house without seeing it. I bought this house without seeing it. My best friend went and looked at it for me. And we had just had so many like near misses, offers, everything like that. I was, hysterical crying every time one fell through. So she was here and I wasn't, and she found the place. But when I finally saw it, and I knew where it was on a map, but I'm like within walking distance from the canal, the Mississippi, and then you go a little teeny bit, north, and you've got the lake. And all of New Orleans pretty much is below sea level. So it's like I've got water all around me now. And that influences the character of the magic just so much. I finally got my yard to stop flooding. Hooray. I installed a sump pump. Yay me. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that either. So yeah, it definitely changed the spirit of the religion, but a lot of stuff has changed in the past year. So it's hard to say how much of it has changed just because I'm in New Orleans and how much of it is just because the world is changing.
Yeah, boy, isn't it? It's funny, up north here, we got sump pumps in our basement. I've never heard of a sump pump for your lawn, but it makes sense.
If
Oh,
you saw how much water my yard takes on,
yeah, yeah,
like it's the
yeah.
low point from all 6 different backyards drain
Right,
into my
right,
yard.
right, right. What do you, totally off on a tangent here, but what do you do with it? Where do you pump the water so it doesn't just flow right back in? I'm curious. Sorry.
Um, this is where I look
Never
all kinds
mind.
of
Never
shifty.
mind.
You're not supposed to send it to the abandoned house next door. So
But there you have it. Okay. We'll get off of that for a minute. Let's see. You talked about Ashe and ocean energies. Why don't you give listeners a breakdown on exactly what the difference is, how they combine, and how they figure in your practice?
well, I talk about it a lot in the book because I do cover a whole bunch of different female Orishas. And I start with Oshun because initiation wise, I'm a daughter of Oshun, and that's, I guess, what most people would consider Santeria. But if you're in the tradition, you call it La Regla La Kumi. Santeria is kind of like the low class name for it. So Oshun is the Orisha of love, beauty, money, but she's actually physically the Ashe of the river, if we talk about that. So people see her as being connected to the Mississippi. They see her as being connected to the East River in New York. They see her as connected really to all rivers because her spirit is present in all rivers. And it's also present in all the things that she stands for and all the offerings that you give her and all the herbs and all of those things. So it really is an all-encompassing system, which I think, again, is another distinction that I make between an Orisha and a goddess, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are used to, okay, I have a goddess, I'm going to offer her this thing. And for Oshun, it's not really an offering. It's more like I'm offering this thing and I'm using this thing in my magic that is representative of you. The river water is representative of her. The river water is her on some level. And that's different to me than I'm going to leave flowers for Aphrodite or something like that. If I look at a sunflower, that literally has the Ashe and the character of Oshun. She's present when I have that flower there or that river water there. So that's the difference. And I think it just sort of shifts the script a little bit in looking at how you look at the whole entire world, because then again, you're looking at things in a much more sacred way, as far as I can see, that you're thinking of everything as being part of a gigantic universal continuum of spirit that you can try and align yourself with, that you can try and understand what's really going on a larger scale.
So does everything have an Ashe associated with it?
Yep.
Okay. That's good to
Yep.
know.
Yep. I mean,
Uh,
you could spend your whole life figuring out what it all is. And then
right.
it varies from practitioner to practitioner. It's not like there's one right way to do it. Somebody in Miami might do it one way, somebody in New Orleans might do it another way, somebody back in Cuba might do it a different way. So there are certain overall arching guidelines, but the individual things, it's kind of like a recipe. You know what I mean? That's the easiest thing I can liken it to. You might make your recipe for, this particular thing one way, and I might make it another way. You're not wrong and I'm not wrong. It's just, this is how our tastes are and how we've developed this particular thing to exist in our lives.
So you mentioned that you're part of an initiated tradition, and also, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that, there's a particular school of practice that you belong to down in New Orleans. Can people practice this on their own outside of a group? Is there kind of a self-initiation into the African traditional religions?
There's no, and I put this in my first book, there's really is no self-initiation. Now, there are things you can do, but self-initiation really isn't a thing because it's sort of, traditionally it was an oral thing. So it was handed down from teacher to student, and everybody's going to be different. If I use the food analogy again, some people are going to be deathly allergic to peanuts. Some people are going to eat peanuts 5 times a day, so you have to shape the religious teaching to the individual person and the religious learning to the individual person. But like I said, that said, there's definitely things you can do to sort of connect with them, to understand them better. And a lot of those recipes and spells and workings I put in the Orishas, Goddesses, and Voodoo Queens book, so people can connect with them on a deeper level. And then if they feel like they want to move forward, they can try and find an actual teacher or get a reading and see what's the best way for them to proceed.
So there's obviously you're in New Orleans now. It was in your heart, obviously, when you were writing the book, because of the strength of the tradition down there. When you talk about Voodoo Queens, it's really hard to not talk about Marie Laveau. How does she and other Voodoo Queens figure into this book? I think you mentioned that some people can, they reach a point in their life where they become Orishas. You know, um, Spend a little time on Marie Laveau and other Voodoo Queens a bit.
Oh, sure. I mean, she wasn't the first, but she's certainly the best well-known
Right.
of the Voodoo Queens. It's said by some that her mother was a Voodoo Queen. And I think it's important to understand when we talk about her, the records from this time are very inconsistent. We're not talking about records. We don't have the internet. We don't have even a gigantic organizational system. So a lot of the records are either court records or Catholic Church records, because she was a devout Catholic for all of her life. But that said, there are some reports, in newspapers and pieces of the time that her mother was also a voodoo priestess, her grandmother was also a voodoo priestess. There's evidence that she did a lot of philanthropic work during her lifetime. Her backyard was actually sort of a tent city for indigenous people that had been displaced. She would bring food to prisoners. There's a rumor about she used to make psychedelic gumbo for those on death row. But I'd love to uncover that recipe.
Right.
Psychedelic gumbo recipe. We do have a lot of mushrooms that grow in the area. But so there was all these things that she did for the community. And in addition to being the most famous voodoo priestess out there, she was the first person to hold public ritual. She was the first person to charge for psychic services, which, as anybody knows, we all got to eat too. So I don't think we need to fault her for that. I think we should applaud her for that. She was the first person to have mixed race services. People of all races and walks of life could come to her rituals. So I think these are really gigantic milestones. And then there's all these other crazy folktale legends about her too. So I think this is why we still honor her today. She, had all of this strength. She had all of this power. It was said that even Queen Victoria was one of her clients. So this is, yeah, she definitely had it all going on. But there were others. I like to make jokes about it. There's a lot of people in the city now who claim lineage. There are a few people who can actually claim lineage, and a lot more that try and claim it. There's a lot of people that, even make statues of themselves here in the city, which to me, make a little statue of yourself while you're still alive and sell it to people so they can pray to you. Have at it. sure.
Go for it, right?
Yeah, why not? Okay. So that's and some, but it's funny, every once in a while the police department still gets threatening letters signed Marie Laveau, which I think is hilarious, because New Orleans police is just about as rotten as the police everywhere else. So I think that's amusing that she still, continues to have this manifestation of threatening them by mail.
Continues to harass the police. That's great. That's a great tradition,
After
actually.
death. Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So, talk to me, talk to others about the structure of your book. I mean, it's not just talking about or a history of all this, but you've also got spells and recipes in there. How do they function in the book? And uh, just give me a kind of a lowdown on the structure of the book and how the recipes and spells function.
Well, I love putting recipes in my book because I feel like cooking for the Orisha is something that everybody can do. They can do it as an honoring. You can do it to nourish yourself. You can do it to connect with them. These foods have the ashe and the sacred energy in them. And it gets you got to cook anyway, right? So it gets you in the mindset of including more spirituality in your life, which is something that I've always really put to the forefront. So I broke the book down according to the different Orishas and Loas that are honored in New Orleans voodoo and Haitian voodoo and Lakumi and Ifa, and then some of the ones that are still honored, back in Benin in Africa. So there's a whole giant continuum about that. And then each section has different spells and recipes for them and ways to connect to them. And, wherever one was available, sacred stories about them. So you could understand better their character and how they function. And then I was really happy to also put in, sacred art and music, because I think this is a way a lot of people can connect to these energies on a deep level, like on almost on a visceral level. If you're dancing or listening to music or even seeing a piece of great art, that has a powerful effect on your body. So I wanted to include that, and I wanted to include some of the more modern things that have come out. I've been doing this for a long time. My first book came out in '03, I think. I'm bad with dates, but people didn't like to talk about voodoo back then. People didn't like to talk about Orisha. It was very much a practice that was kept secret, and that was for safety reasons, because there was still a lot of persecution on every different level. And I think this is something some of the millennials don't really truly understand, what it was like to live under the oppression of these things. My daughter, she's going to get mad at me because I say she turns 30, but when she was young, I couldn't tell anybody I was a voodoo practitioner, because that would have been cause for somebody to call the police and
Right.
me to have some sort of investigation about it.
Wow.
So it's a very different world now, where I can see people say that they're a voodoo priestess or a Haitian mambo, and say that in public without getting a whole bunch of backlash. And that's one of the good things I think that have come out of this time.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
yeah, some of the older folks are still a little bit leery because, again, it was called, a lot of our ceremonies were held in basements because they were in secret, because you didn't want everybody to know what was going on. So it was both, we had secret information, and also we didn't want to be found out. Especially here in the city as well, there were laws against voodoo, there were laws against drumming, for hundreds of years.
I think there was, well, at least in New York, there was laws against tattoos as well for quite a while, if not still continuing. But yeah, and I mean, it's funny because it brings back kind of the history of Red Wheel Weiser. When we were up in York, Maine. The offices were in a different location than the warehouse, and both of those locations were covered by a PO box. And at some point, I asked the owners, why are you doing this? Why don't you publish the actual locations? And she said, you know what, there's still people who don't appreciate what we're doing and would mean to do us harm as a result. And ooh, okay, came as news to me, but those were different times. That was back when your daughter and my son were very young. And at the time, it was interesting. I worked in the warehouse, and one of the series of books that I remember specifically was the old Anna Riva
Oh yeah.
editions, with just little pamphlets, little staple bound
Hmm.
pamphlets that must have formed kind of the basis for a lot of whatever information people could scrape together on topics like this.
Yeah, it was the only thing you could get back in
Yeah.
the day, you know,
Uh,
definitely.
And then, I mean, it was funny because, those particular books, we had some business with bodegas, and those were the books that they would order. But all right. So let's see. When I was going through the list of books at the beginning there, Love Magic you did with us, we actually did an interview about that. But one of the books was Water Magic, which you mentioned was published with somebody else. Um, Tell me a little bit about that book because I'm completely unfamiliar with that one. Water
So
Magic.
here it is.
Also.
I
Perfect.
know you guys didn't publish it, but here it
Nice.
is.
Who did end up publishing it?
It's a Llewellyn book. It's
Of
part of a
course it is.
series. Yeah, of course it is.
All
Of course.
right. So who who acquired the book, could I ask?
Heather Green.
Heather Green.
Heather
Okay.
Green. It's part of a series. Heather came up with the series, and she
Yeah.
just thought because of my connection to Oshun, she wanted me to do Water Magic, which was the first one in the series.
Right.
So it was just a lot of fun. I mean, it's very
Yeah.
different than the Orishas book. It's just pretty much everything there is to know about water magic, which
Got it.
was fun, from, gods and goddesses to actual what you do with the water. To my favorite part about it was sacred sites. And if it wasn't the pandemic, I would have gone to every sacred site in this book, like Snoqualmie Falls and Niagara, and
Right.
all these things. Actually, Witch Dr. Uchu, who has a book out with Weiser, also did a piece in there about Niagara Falls because that's his jam.
Right.
So yeah.
Cool. So how I mean, you've mentioned water a couple of times, both in your personal life where you're located now, including your backyard,
Yeah.
and in the book. How does we know water plays a part in here. Did you stay within the tradition in Water Magic, the book, or did you get a little bit broader?
Oh, it's very broad. It's
Okay.
really, everything from, there's these weird Japanese vampires that come after you're behind in the middle of the night and crawl out of the water. Like, so that's in there, I mean, I approached it more like an anthropologist. There's a wide variety of water from every different culture in there.
Got it.
So that was fun. I got to put my anthro hat back on for a minute.
Oh, that's cool. So let's see. Do you still practice anthropology professionally, or is that something that just informs?
I try. I mean, Black women in academia, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd make more working at McDonald's,
Right.
honestly,
Right. Right.
so, and all my friends who were working in academia, it's just gotten worse and worse for them over the past few years. So I did, however, get to lecture for University of Cambridge a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was fascinating. That was sort of on my bucket list. And I made them promise that when it's not COVID times anymore, that I get to go lecture at University of Cambridge in person.
Right.
So that was fun for me.
That's
I
fantastic.
mean, I
So,
think my mother fell out of her chair. She was like, "What? You're lecturing at Harvard?" She didn't fall out of her chair when I lectured there, but University of Cambridge, she fell out. Yeah.
Harvard doesn't matter, but Cambridge, oh
No,
yeah.
Cambridge. Yeah, yeah.
Um, so for these gigs, it's a guest lecture kind of thing.
Yeah, it was part of a series on magic and ecology, which was really
Oh,
fascinating. I mean,
neat.
so there was a little bit about both the Orisha's book and just the whole cosmology of how we fit into the environment. So that was fascinating. And then there was a little bit of the water magic book in there too. So it was good. It was a lot of fun.
So was this straight anthro, or was this more religious studies, a mix of the two?
It's put out by their humanities
Okay.
center.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that it was part of a series that sort of, I know Eric Davis was there and Sabrina Scott and like some of the other like big names who write about magic, but also other things.
Right. That's super cool that you're included in kind of that pantheon of authors, really. Um, I mean, I'll give you one anecdote for water magic. It was very interesting. My partner and I were up with a group on an island up in Maine. Maybe I think it was 3 years ago at this point. But there we are on this island, and kind of a very strange and auspicious thing happened. There's an animal that washed up on our end of the of the island. That was a fairly freshly dead animal, and we ended up thanking thanking the universe for providing this for us. It made up part of a meal, and we left what we could for the wildlife and birds that were already attracted to it. And just thought, what an amazing experience to have this happen. And then I was doing one of these interviews with another author maybe 2 months later, and she mentioned, "Oh, we were up Maine. What were you up there for?" "We were up there for a water magic experience." And I said, "No kidding. Where were you?" And they were on the mainland shore, straight across from where we were, working their water magic. And just things like that don't appear to me to be coincidental. So they worked their
No, not at
magic.
all.
Something happened on my end as a receiver of that boon, I guess. And here I was 2 months later talking to the person who participated in that ceremony. It was just one of those things that was bizarre enough that it happened, and then to find out that there were other actors that may or may not have been involved. But that can't be coincidental, right? I mean,
No, not at all. That's
just
amazing,
yeah,
and that's what I love about water. It's like our bodies are mostly water, our hearts, our minds, the earth is mostly water. So in a way, it is all connected on this deep and emotional level. And I
right.
think that that's beautiful when it's directly connected
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
physical level,
And
and
I
you
mean,
can see that manifestation.
and it's interesting because being on an island off the mainland, having to take a ferry to get there, too often the water is seen as something that separates. But very obviously, in that particular case, it was something that joined us. Which is kind of an interesting perspective that I really hadn't thought of before. So, for what it's
Yeah.
worth. All right. Let's see. What have you got going on now?
What have I got going on now? Well, I have the Voodoo B&B that I
Yeah,
told you about.
yeah,
We're also in the process of reprinting my first book, which has been out of print for over 10 years.
got it.
So that's exciting. And then just trying to keep myself afloat, literally,
Right.
in the midst of everything,
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I'm still writing a lot. I'm doing a lot of workshops. I'm doing the Other Worlds event that's coming up. I'm doing Hex over the summer. I may be doing an event in New York over the summer. So things are starting to open back up, and I'm really happy about that. I still have my blog, Voodoo Universe, the largest voodoo blog in the world. So people can check that out, which just mystifies me because there's over 670 posts on there. I'm like, I wrote that much, you know, that's crazy to me. But yeah,
well, there's got to be a book or two in there, right?
that's what I keep thinking. It's got to be one or two is already in there. Just
Yeah,
pick it
yeah.
out,
Put it
paste it
together,
back together.
edit
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
So, what was your first book?
My first book was Voodoo and Afro-Caribbean Paganism.
Okay,
So it was going online for like $500. And I would
right.
tell people, for $500, I will sit on your lap and read you this book. Like, that's because I'm not getting any of that. Like, it's
Yeah.
out of print. I don't get a dime from that,
Who's
So
publishing it now?
Warlock Press.
Warlock Press. And when is it due out?
We're hoping by the end of June. So
Oh,
that's
perfect. Okay.
yeah, so
So,
people don't have to pay $500 for it anymore. They can
right.
get it, and it's really basic. It's a basic exploration of all the different African traditional religions, and there's a lot of updated material in there that I'm happy about. A lot of stuff about Black Lives Matter, protest magic, which I think is really germane to right now.
Right. I was gonna say, I mean, you mentioned you mentioned first publication in 2003. A lot's gone on in 18 years, anyway, but also in your life. It's nice that they've afforded you the opportunity to revise like that.
Yeah, it makes me happy because there's so many things I look at it, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't necessarily have put that this way right now.
Right, right.
And I think the African traditional religions, like I said, it's not buried anymore. It's definitely coming to its own. So, and I have 20 almost years more experience about the topic and the subject, both as an academic and a practitioner. I have my own New Orleans style voodoo house. We're going to put everybody on a plane as soon as we can and get them down here to New Orleans. months, and we're going to continue. But so that was nice. It's good, and I just want the information to be out there
Yeah,
for people.
absolutely. We do on the other hat I wear here at Weiser is as the production director. I do print management, budget schedules, kind of that boring end of things. But one of the things that always hangs us up with older titles, like something from 2003, is that actually the files are no longer readable. They're done in a layout program like Quark or some relic like that that we just can't open anymore. So we're starting with a PDF, stripping the text out. Is that the process that they went through with your book?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. All right, that's
Yes, and then
interesting.
bits of it were missing,
Yeah,
and I mean, luckily, I still actually have a physical copy.
right.
So, yeah, it was not easy. It was not easy. I
Well,
mean, it
good.
wasn't even easy to get the rights back. They wouldn't even communicate with me for a very long time. So that was a struggle. And again, not because I was trying to, be some sort of crazy profit mogul about it, just because I wanted the information out there.
Right, right. So the Warlock Press, who's publishing the revised edition, they're not the original publishers.
No,
Okay,
no.
great. I'm glad that you made the effort. I'm glad that's happening. And I hate to say it, but June is right around the corner here now.
I know. I know. It's like, so quick.
So,
Everything's happening so quick.
are are you done with your work on that book? Is that pretty much all in their hands at this point?
Pretty much, you know. I mean, again, I thought revising it would be easier than writing it all again from scratch, but the reality of it, no, because so much of it was updated and so much of it is different. It really was like almost rewriting the entire thing from scratch.
Got it.
So, but I think I'm done.
All
Come
right.
on, you never know.
Oh,
There's always like,
absolutely.
oh, this is somebody finds something. Oh, blah, blah, blah. I mean, even with titles that are already done. Somebody left a bad review the other day because I got one date wrong. Like, oh, your dates for this is one day off and it's different than in the page, whatever. I'm like, you should be a copy editor.
Thank you for copy editing my book for free. I really appreciate
Yes, I appreciate that. How about next time we get together ahead of time and do it? Yeah.
it. Oh
Yeah.
boy. All right, good stuff in publishing, that's for sure. Lilith, it's been just amazing having you on the show. I really appreciate you spending the time with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I wanted to tell people they can email me at voodoouniverse@yahoo.com. I have these wonderful Orishas, goddesses, and Voodoo Queen stickers that I'm happy to send to people. I just ordered a whole bunch more today. So, and they can follow me on social media. I'm Lilith Dorsey everywhere. I want to be Insta famous. So thank you. And thank you so much, Mike, for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's been great. It's kind of fun having a follow-up author with a new book. I know the other book was not exactly, I think, what you had envisioned. So I'm glad we really nailed it on this one. It's just I mean, I love stuff like this.
No, the second printing came with that. The first one didn't have it, but
Oh,
I mean, it's been number one since it came out, pretty
yeah, yeah,
much.
yeah.
And I'm just amazed at that. I'm so happy it's being received that way.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, that was what, 10 months ago. So
I
yeah,
think so. Yeah, so it's already into a second printing. I think maybe even a third or fourth at
I
this
think it's
point. So
third. At
yeah,
that, the last I heard was a third. So
that's
yeah.
great. That's great. I'm glad that that it is so successful for your vision of what it should be. So
Yeah. 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 If you type voodoo into Amazon, this book pops up first,
perfect.
which I'm amazed at that. And I'm so happy.
That's what we like to hear.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Like I said, it's been just absolutely fantastic having you back on the show, and wish you all success with the B&B and
Yeah.
uh, all future endeavors. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Wiser Books Radio Hour. Find us online at www.wiserbooks.com and wherever you listen to podcasts.